fish is food. As chefs, as the people who eat fish, we think of fish as food. And it is food for 1.35 billion people across the world. So that means for every 1 in 6 of you, fish provides diet and nutrition. But there's much more to fish than just food. It's also livelihoods. So in India alone, you have 4 million people who are dependent on marine fisheries for their livelihoods. And this includes men and women. And marine fisheries also contributes to about 1% of India's GDP. And majority of that is consumed domestically, and a small portion of it is exported. And among the domestic consumption, most of it is actually consumed in rural markets, and a bit of it is consumed, and also the rest of it is consumed in the urban markets. So it actually is very important for livelihoods of not just the fishers, but also a lot of other people who are dependent on it economically. And fish, as a wildlife biologist, it's also wildlife. And contrary to what happens on land, where most of our fruits, vegetables, and crops are grown, the fish in the sea are wild. There's no input that we provide. Fish actually migrate up and down the coasts. They also migrate within a span of 24 hours, from the depths of the sea to the surface of the sea. Fish are also part of the marine ecosystem. That means there are other organisms such as birds and other animals that depend on fish, and including us. So to recap, fish is food. It's very important for livelihoods, and it's wildlife. So we should be really worried about, whether it is sustainable, what we are doing to the oceans. But if you look at this graph, this is the global seafood harvest. On the x-axis, you have the amount of seafood that's been harvested since the 1950s, and that is 1 million metric tons. That's the order of the y-axis, and that's the years. So if you look at it, seafood harvests peaked in the early 1970s, and it's been declining ever since. If you look at the Indian seafood harvest, it's more or less the same. Again, the y-axis is 1 million tons, and you have what happened is our seafood harvest peaked in the 1990s, but then it's been going down as well. Globally, about 4,000 fisheries, marine fisheries. These are, you could say, independent fisheries which sort of which are restricted to a certain ocean or a certain sea. There are about 4,700 odd fisheries, and most of them are in decline. In India also, about 84% of our fisheries are in decline. So, and if you listen to the narrative of why this is happening, across the world, you look at news, you look at science, you look at research, everyone is of the opinion that overfishing is the biggest problem that's affecting marine life. But is this true? I mean, are all fishers just the same? Is everyone out to, deplete the resource as soon as they can? So you look at this in India, these are trawlers, these are mechanized boats, these are very large, and they can actually take out tons of seafood from the sea every time they go on a fishing trip. This is a Chinese fishing net. This is shore-based. So there's a very interesting system of weights and counterweights. You lower the net into the water, the fish come, and then the net is lifted. So very little fish is caught in this method. This is one fisherman in one small little boat. So, and he doesn't even have an outboard motor on this boat. So what he can catch is limited by the amount of time that he can spend out at sea. This is the fiber reinforced boats, which is actually the workhorse of the Indian seafood industry. It can be, it's very versatile. It can be launched from even sandy beaches anywhere across India's coastline. And even this, it has to be hauled back onto the sand, and it has to be pushed into the ocean. So it's again limited by physical labor and physical effort. And each boat at the most will carry 4 or 5 people. And the fishing trips are short. That means the fish is incredibly fresh. And just by the nature of the technology that is used, it's very small scale and it is sustainable. And this is another example. This is a shore-based fishing operation. It's called a shore scene. Sometimes you have about 40 to 50 people, working to pull this net in. So you have one group of fishermen on this side. A boat will go around, loop, and pass the other end of the net to the other set of fishermen, and then they'll pull it in. So again, this net functions because of physical strength, endurance, and so on. And this is also incredibly fresh because the net is hauled in, and if there's fish, sometimes they're still jumping as they're hauled onto the sand. So there seems to be this diversity of fishing methods out there, And to just continue this is what you see on that side is the pole and line. So it's a pole with a line and a hook. And if there's no pole, it's just a hand line. And each hand line or each pole will have one hook. That means you can catch one fish. That's it. So you remove the fish, you again put out the line, and then you catch another fish. This is the gill net. This is one of the most common methods used to fish. This can either be set at the bottom of the ocean near the seabed by weights, or it can be set at the surface using floats, or it can be set somewhere in the mid column, depending on what the fisherman wants to catch. So as people who've lived on land, we think the sea is homogeneous, but it's not. There are sandy bottom in the sea, there are rocky bottoms, there are coral reefs, and fish, different kinds of fish are use different parts of the ocean. And fishermen actually use this knowledge to target a fish. So if you put the net at the bottom of the sea, you will get solefish, you will get halibuts and all the other kinds of organisms that live in the bottom of the sea. If you put it near the top, you will get predators, you will like the seerfish, for example, and other predators in the sea. So moving on, this is called the purse seine. This is an example of a mechanized, a large-scale fishing operation. So what happens is, as you can see in the bottom strip, there's a shoal of fish is detected. The boat goes around and then finishes the loop. Then the bottom of the net is pulled, is tightened like a purse, and then the whole shoal is hauled onto the boat. So this can actually wipe out populations really quickly. And this is an example of a trawler. This is used to catch prawn. So you have the trawler up there, and you have nets that are dragged along the bottom of the sea. And because the prawns live at the bottom of the sea, but the nets don't distinguish between prawn and other kinds of fish that are there at the bottom of the sea. So there's a lot of sea life other than prawn also that gets caught. And the other thing that happens is these are the kind of boards that are used to disturb the seabed, and that also really destroys the seabed and the marine habitat there, and it's not good for the ecosystem in the long run. But is that it? And the answer is there's much more to the story. And you would be wondering, why would a fisherman whose livelihood depended on fish, trawl out, empty the ocean? And it turns out that as seafood consumers, we are also playing a role in, what the fishermen are doing. So we wanted to understand what varieties do seafood consumers eat at home? What options do seafood eaters have outside the home, that's in restaurants? And what base in cookbooks? So we did a nationwide online survey in which about 500 people responded. We sampled restaurant menus, 400 restaurants from across 4 metros, and we also looked at cookbooks. And what we found is that as consumers, we are eating very little of the diversity that is actually there in Indian waters. So in Indian waters, you have about 300 kinds of fish, out of which at least 100 are caught on a regular basis by the fishermen. But the average number of species that we are eating are about 7. And if you also look at the graph, you see that the bulk of what people are eating is prawn, pomfret, ravas, Bombay duck, and also searfish to a lesser extent. But if you see fishes like barracuda, it's very little, for example. So, of course, some of the consumers are eating very diverse. They are eating anything from 1 to 18 different varieties of seafood. Coming to what restaurants are serving. This is a word cloud. So the size of the font shows you what is really popular in restaurant menus. So again, you see that it's sort of repeating. So you have prawn, which is occupying center space. You have pomfret, you have squid, you have crab, and so on. But you see all those little varieties that are that you can't even read. And very few restaurants are serving those. So again, it seems like as seafood consumers at home, we're eating a very limited diet of seafood, and even restaurants are serving limited species. So if you look at the average number of species served, it's about 10. There's a huge range. So some restaurants are really going out there and putting a diversity of seafood that's available, and 22% of that variety comes from foreign species. And some of the positives, as we were discussing this morning, dried seafood is served in 7 restaurants. So dried seafood was a huge part of marine food, because during the monsoons, when you had just small-scale boats, nobody could go out fishing because of the weather. And what they would consume in these monsoon months was what was caught when the weather was good and what was dried. But now, because you have better boats and you have fresh fish throughout the year, dried seafood is actually losing ground. Some of the things that can be improved is traceability, which just means, it's just a simple word which signifies where is the fish from. So only one restaurant actually listed the source of seafood. The second thing that can be improved is fish eggs are served in about 11 restaurants. And the reason why fish eggs are best avoided is because if you catch fish when they're breeding, or just before they're breeding, that's when the female fish have eggs in them. And if you catch the fish, then then you're actually impacting the ability of the population to regenerate, to grow, to increase, which in turn will affect the future supply of fish for all of us. And another thing that can be improved is there are a few species that are found in Indian waters that are threatened with extinction. and that is the yellowfin tuna. That is actually, as per the International Union of Conservation for Nature, it's near threatened. That's there on some of our of the menus. You also have the narrow barred seerfish, which is so. There are 3 varieties of seerfish in India. It's called surmai in Maharashtra. It's called vanjaram in Tamil Nadu, and if you go to a marketplace, it's just called vanjaram. It's just called surmai. No one distinguishes between the 3 varieties of seerfish that we have, and one of them is actually near threatened. So even that is being served, and you also have shark fin and sharks, and also the bluefin tuna. And if you look at the seafood recipes, seafood varieties that are, I would say, listed in recipe books or cookbooks, the average variety of seafood that's listed is 8 species or so. But again, there's a huge diversity. You have the cookbooks, some cookbooks just featuring 1 seafood variety, and you have some that feature up to 21. And there's no additional information about the species. So it's just fish. And there's there's no information about that might help the consumer make a better choice. So to sum up, what seems to be happening is fishermen are catching like this huge diversity of species. You see 10 different kinds of fish here, but as consumers, we're just eating 3. So what this results in is that some fishermen use destructive fishing boats, fishing gear, techniques that repeatedly go out and catch the same set of species. And so that's where there's this disconnect between producers, which are the fishermen, and the consumers, which is all of us. And that's essentially where we are trying to work, making the connections between the fishermen, seafood consumers, and fish on your plate. And the way we do it, and one of the ways in which you can start is by eating diverse. Like I said, Indian fishermen catch at least 100 different varieties of seafood. So if you expand your diet, if you include more, then it's good for the marine life in the long run. And also it helps you because different fish have different micronutrients. So you're actually getting better nutrition by diversifying your diet. Eat seasonal. So different fish breed at different times of the year. This is a small chart which shows you 9 kinds of seafood, and that's the 12 months of the year. Red is when they're breeding, and green is when they're safe to eat. So if you just trace the line, and if you see that it's breeding in that particular month, avoid the fish, and when it comes back into green, you can go ahead and eat your favorite kind of seafood. And why you should try and follow this and avoid fish that are breeding is because, for example, if you see this fish, this is a mouth brooder. So that means it carries its young in its mouth. So it doesn't eat during this time. It actually starves. It loses body condition to make sure that the young ones actually get a better start in their lives. And imagine what would happen if you go out and caught this fish. You're actually removing that fish and the next generation from the water. And support small-scale fishermen. And this is important because small-scale fishermen, their fishing trips are really short. They're just a few hours to a day at the most. They have really fresh fish. Just because of the technology and the boats that they use, they're very limited to how long they can stay out, how far they can go to fish at sea, and therefore how much fish they can catch. So they catch very little, and that is actually very, very beneficial to the marine ecosystem and to our seafood security in the long term. So just to sum up, it's just about eating diverse, it's about eating seasonal, and it's about supporting small-scale fishermen. And this is our website. So if you go to our website, you have, it's very simple. The information is provided. So you have two regions, either the West Coast or the East Coast, and the month. The West Coast and the East Coast, we've differentiated because different fish breed at different times of the year on the West Coast and the East Coast. And you can select the month, you can select the coast, and it'll just, the fishes that are safe to eat will just populate below. If you want to sample the diversity in a month, you can go to our season calendar. Again, you can choose the month, you can choose the coast, and you can choose safe or avoid if you want to also avoid certain fishes. And all the fishes that are safe to eat in that month will drop down. And this message is what we've been taking to restaurants, to chefs, to seafood consumers. So this is a small tent cart that we have on tables so that consumers can actually make the decision while they're ordering their food. We also take seafood consumers and chefs on fish explorations because we think it's really important to reconnect consumers to the producers. I mean, as in with all of our food, we just seem to be getting more and more disconnected. We don't know where our vegetables come from. We don't know who grows our cereals, etc. So by removing these many layers in between, you are actually supporting fishermen directly. You're giving them a better price, and you're helping them economically. So we take people out on fish explorations. We also work with chefs, and we also take chefs to fish landing sites. We also work with the next generation of seafood consumers in schools. We also work with the government. So this was a meeting to understand what the tuna value chain is like. And the reason we are focused on this approach is because we feel that there are three big advantages. One is this will help maintain fish populations. So there's an ecological goal. The second one is we're creating educated seafood consumers. And as educated seafood consumers, there are a lot of nutritional and diet benefits for all of us. And by supporting small-scale fishermen, we are actually helping their livelihoods, we're helping the economy, and we're making sure that this will continue into the future as well. So I would just like to reiterate that a fish on a plate is much more than just food. It's food, it's wildlife, and it's livelihoods for people in India and across the world. So the next time you choose your seafood, whether you're buying it or whether you're going to a restaurant, you're ordering, just remember this and try and all the tools are available there, and just try and make the right decision. We also put up a lot of information about monthly seafood recommendations on our social media platforms, and that's my email address. You can reach out to me anytime. We're more than happy to go along on this journey together with you. And yeah, I'll just stop here, and if there's any other questions, I'll be happy to answer.